Well, the gentleman I'm about to bring up is the only person in the world who can show you how to buy a house for $1. Ladies and gentlemen, the millionaire's millionaire, Mr. Rick Otten.
Mr. Rick Otten!
Since then, Rick and his wife Jane have purchased more than 350 properties in the US and Australia.
A new player in Australia aiming to help those would-be homeowners who've been rejected by the banks.
Rick Otten is the man with the plan.
His name is Rick Otten. He's Sydney businessman Rick Otten.
Rick Otten is the founder of We Buy Houses.
Richard Otten is fresh out of Australia.
Former Sydney-sider by the name of Rick Otten.
Rick Otten makes a living buying houses.
Rick Otten started on the path to real estate riches over 12 years ago.
Okay, here's Rick Otten!
I've done 4 deals now in session 3 and we've made $150,000.
We've done 3 deals and made $80,000.
We've done 3 deals and we've made $90,000.
Jeff done a deal, made $75,000.
We have done 7 deals so far and made over $300,000.
I'm up to about number 14 and just turned over $400,000.
Rick Otten joins us from Fox Studios in Dallas, Texas. Good evening to you.
Who's in this room today because you've come to make some money? Hands up if you come to make a really big bunch of money. Hands up if you're interested in buying a house for $1. Something you might want to, let's expand on that a little bit. Anybody ever heard of a football club called the Chelsea football team in the United Kingdom?
Yes.
Yes. Then you probably know that in 1982 it was sold. It was bought by a man by the name of Mark Bates for £1. 1985, Barclays Bank, one of the biggest banks in the world, was sold for £1. 1995. Anybody ever heard of a place down south called Luna Park? It's a big amusement park in New South Wales. Anybody know how much it was sold for by the state government? Correct, $1 to multiplex. Woolworth Limited that crashed last year in the United Kingdom looks like it's going to be sold for £1. So I'm thinking if all these corporations, companies and amusement parks can be sold and brought for £1 or $1, why couldn't we do the same thing with houses? So today, what I want to do in the spare time I've got for the 90 minutes, guys, I'd like to see if anybody would be interested in buying houses on the basis you don't need no money, no bank loans, no anything except breathe oxygen. In actual fact, my strategies work best if you actually know nothing about real estate. Do I have anybody in the room who just knows nothing about real estate? Oh, that'd be great. That'll work really well for you. My strategies work best for those people. It also works really well if you have no time to look at houses. Is there anybody here who's time poor that doesn't have time to look at houses? Good. And I'm going to put a lot of students up here today who do what I do full time. And they've actually found the best way for them to make money in real estate is to actually have no money. Is anybody broke? So, that's the journey we're going to go on the next 90 minutes. I think I'm going to change a lot of dimensions on what people know about buying and selling houses in Australia. A little bit about who I am. What you saw, that little bit of an intro there, I used to have a TV show. I was actually a TV guy. And I had one of the first television shows on the Fox network in the late 80s, early 90s. And when that show finished, I was in Dallas, Texas. When I finished in Dallas, Texas, unemployed with a couple of pairs of shorts, a couple of pairs of T-shirts, I had no job. All I had was a funny accent. And people said, what are you going to do for money? And I married an American lady who gave me 12 months to find something to do, or I had to go and get a job. And I noticed that house prices in the United States were very cheap. Very, very cheap. They were going through a thing called the savings and loans. The savings and loans banking crisis, the late 80s, early 90s. And in that period of time, the banks had collapsed. And although America is doing its best to wipe out the banking system all over again, back there in 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were no banks in the states of Texas. There were no banks. There were no banks in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico. So my question to you today is, guys, just suppose with the global financial crisis, if the Rudd government decides to shut down the Australian banking system in order to protect Australian assets, where are we up here on the Gold Coast? Do you think house prices might drop in value if you couldn't borrow any money from the banking system? What do you think? Anybody want to have a shot at what value you think house prices might drop by? Drop by $1? Pretty close. When I was buying in Dallas, Texas, and the banking crisis took hold, house prices only dropped a minor 95%. Now, this is a little bit of video they have here that was taken about 15 years ago when I was buying these houses, and I think you'll get the idea of just how cheap things got.
Here's a recent acquisition. It was 22 home units. They were built in 1985, eventually sold the building for $1.5 million. We just recently paid $180,000 for them. That worked out to be $3,000 each per unit, and the rest of the money was loaned to us by the American government over the next 30 years.
So what I was doing was I was buying these buildings of brand new home units, and if I was buying houses, as long as I bought houses in packets of 10, I could get 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes, and as long as I bought packets of 10, they were $1,500 each. And I could buy home units, 2-storey home units, central heat and air, 2-car garages for $600 each. And when I ran out of money, I was buying buildings for $3,000 each, and I had no money, so I went to the American government and I said, could you lend me some? And they lent me the $3,000 to buy each one, and I had to pay it back at the rate of $57 a month over 30 years, and I'd rent them out at $450 a week. So the thing was, now, by the way, if you could buy houses, and I only had a 4-year window because all the banks came back and all the prices went back up. But here's the thing. If you could buy houses on the Gold Coast for $20,000, would anybody buy any? How many would you buy? I get it. Where would you get the money? No banks. They've all gone. Let me ask you something. Could you rely on the system that we have now to buy houses, or would you have to reconcile the fact that that system no longer works, and you'd have to create a whole bunch of new systems based on pulling out a piece of paper and rewrite some stuff? And that's what I did. 25 years ago, in the middle of the desert, I had 4 years to buy houses at the rate of a few every week. And what I had to do was come up with new systems, processes and methods by which I could do that. What I didn't know was 25 years later, I'd be standing here, the owner of a company called We Buy Houses, operates in 4 countries around the globe, probably the biggest house buying organisation in the world today. We can buy a house in less than 7 minutes. We don't use stamp duty, we don't pay money, we use cash, we just buy them for £1. And I think that's why they've got me here speaking to you guys today. I'm sorry, in Australia. We buy them for $1 here, yeah. So, it was some of these principles and techniques I want to impart with you today. By the way, based on that, and I never actually learnt the old way. I never went to school, never went to university, never been a real estate agent, never understood that I was meant to go to the bank, borrow some money, put down a whole bunch of cash, pay stamp duty, and be liable for a loan for 30 years. I never learnt that system. The only system I learnt was I got no money, so I buy my houses without any. So, but based on that, what I want to do is to share with you today some different ways to buy and sell houses. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the things I thought I might share with you right now, before we get into it, is I noticed that Jamie has a book out there called Think and Grow Rich. Has anybody ever read that book, by the way? Napoleon Hill wrote it in 1937. When I started buying houses, that's what I did. I didn't know anything about buying houses, never bought anything in my life, actually, and found myself in the desert, and I picked up Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. And I started reading it. And some of the things I pulled out of it, I think is why I'm here today sharing with you guys. And one of the things I got out of that book was you've got to be entrepreneurial. One of the five things that I pulled out of that book was you've got to be entrepreneurial. You've got to do stuff different. In actual fact, I didn't know anything, but there's one thing I know. Has anybody ever heard that expression? 95% of people end up being poor and 5% end up being rich. Anybody ever heard that expression? I figured out one thing. Don't do what the 95% are doing. So I thought, why would I do what the 95% are doing? So I thought, well, I can't do that. I can't copy that. But I thought, okay, the book says be entrepreneurial, do what the 5% are doing, but what the 5% are doing hasn't been created yet, hasn't been invented. But there's always a process if you just hang in there long enough to find out what it is. So, being entrepreneurial, and I started looking at other entrepreneurs and how they do stuff. And one of them was Kerry Packer. If anybody remembers Kerry Packer was alive, Kerry Packer came up with an idea, and Kerry would have these great ideas, a great entrepreneur. He'd have an idea like going to buy a small country like, say, New Zealand. Now, when Kerry comes up with an idea and the legal firms say you can't do it, well, there's no process for that. What do you think went? Kerry Packer's ideas or the legal firm? Legal firm. Every time. He said, we'll find the guys who can do it. We'll change it. We'll find ways to do it. Very entrepreneurial man. But you've got to think like an entrepreneur. You've got to do stuff differently. When I came to Australia, I didn't get back here till 1990. I'd been away for a long period of time, but I came back. I'm very Australian. I still got koala bears on my doona. But the thing is, when I got back in 1990, I started looking at some stuff because I'd already bought a house with no money. And I noticed when I got back here, people said to me, "Can't do it in Australia." I said, "Why not?" People said to me, "Your systems will never work in Australia." I said, "Gee, why is that?" I said, "Do we still have people in Australia?" They said, "Yes, we do." "Do we still have houses?" "Yes, we do." People said we have to have stamp duty. Ladies and gentlemen, who would like to buy your next house without paying stamp duty? Has anybody ever paid stamp duty before when you bought a house? Yes. Okay, well, I looked at that when I got here. And I started looking at stuff. I got the book, Think Like an Entrepreneur. Think different. What would an entrepreneur do? And the entrepreneur would say, why do I have to pay stamp duty? Because I already bought houses and I never had any money. I wasn't going to change. And I started reading the legislation. Do you realise there's no legislation at all in the Australian set of legislation that says when you buy a house you have to pay stamp duty? In actual fact, stamp duty, ladies and gentlemen, is a transaction tax. It's the same as GST. Is anybody familiar? You guys are familiar with GST. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, when you buy products in Australia with GST, is GST a tax that sometimes when you buy your products, the GST is already included, and sometimes you pay a price and it's plus GST? Would that be right? So therefore, based on how the document is set out, it's either plus GST or it's inclusive of GST. Stamp duty is the same kind of tax. It's what's called a transaction tax. It's not a people tax. The tax is on the transaction. It's not on the people. So, may I make the suggestion to you, if you'd like to do what my students do, who buy houses all throughout Australia and probably haven't been paying stamp duty for the last decade, then why don't I suggest you put this the next time you buy a house and you won't have to pay stamp duty. Next time you're buying a house, write the simple clause in there that the price that I'm paying for the house is inclusive of stamp duty. Stamp duty paid. Now that has a number of advantages to you. The first is, it means the price that you're paying means that now at the disbursement, at the time of settlement, that the stamp duty is coming off the seller's proceeds side of the house and instead of the purchasers. Now when I started teaching this, some of the big developers got on board and they picked it up very quickly. Hence you've got people like Delvin Homes, etc., who sell houses for $1,000. How do they do that? Easy. They make sure that as the seller, Delvin Homes, they pay the stamp duty, the purchaser doesn't. Does it make sense? Now, what that has is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you allow people to buy a house for $1,000 or $2,000, you sell a lot of houses much, much quicker. So, great way to do that. And the other advantage of doing that, of course, is now that if the stamp duty is paid by the seller and it's built into the price of the house, when you get your financing on the house, it also includes the financing on the stamp duty, and it means you need very little money out of pocket when you complete the transaction on the purchase of your home. Does that add value to you guys? Does it make sense? That simple clause, you just write that in there. Okay, so I started doing it that way, and I thought, oh, that's good. And then I got on a bit of a roll, and I thought, wow, what else can I do different? And I thought, being entrepreneurial, you can do anything, but you've got to be real passionate about it. You've got to really love what you do, because if you don't love what you do, you can't do it. Does anybody in this room, by the way, do property development at all? I don't do that. Some people do. Yeah, I don't do it. I don't understand it. It's not what I do. Does anybody do renovations at all? I don't do that either. I'm sure it's fantastic. I believe it involves a hammer, but I've never done one, but I think it's very good and I think it's exciting. All I know, and I'm very passionate about it, all I know is probably 36 different ways to buy a house for $1 in different countries around the world, or houses for £1. How to buy houses with no money, no stamp duty, no cash, no bank loans in numerous countries around the world. Does that make sense? And I know it all the way down to China, but I'm very thin. I'm very specialised. One of the guys rang me up the other day. He said, Rick, Dave rang me up from Melbourne. He goes, I've got a problem. He said, what? He said, I've got to buy a commercial building. I said, how much is the commercial building? He said, $3 million. I said, how much have you got? He said, I've got $10. I said, He said, $10. I said, how are we going to do that? And he goes, Rick, you're slow. He said, normally you've nodded this out in about 30 seconds. I said, yeah, but Dave, for you in Melbourne, it's 7:30 at night. You've called me in San Francisco, it's 4:30 in the morning. Give me 5 minutes. But there's always a way, there's always a process. But you've got to be passionate about it. You've got to love it, and you've got to believe in what you're doing. And you just keep cutting through. System will always says, by the way, the downside of being entrepreneurial, let me tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, downside of being entrepreneurial. Do you think it's possible? Has anybody here ever been to a dinner party where you've had an idea and you said, I've got this great idea, and you've decided to share it with people at a dinner party? Has anybody ever done that? Yes. And what sort of feedback do you get from the people at the dinner party? I can't do that. Son. If that was legal, it would have already been done by now. Oh, couldn't do that. But see, here's what entrepreneurs do. They tackle process, ladies and gentlemen. That's it. They look at a process, they tackle it head on. I've just been speaking to a whole bunch of lawyers out there, sitting right there. I said, let's do that. And he goes, God, it's never been done that way before, but can we do it? Yes, it's legal. Well, why haven't we done it that way? Because no one else has bothered to sit down and take the time to figure it out. So you've got to be passionate, you've got to love it. By the way, I couldn't understand why real estate agents take so long to sell a house. I take 3 days. If I don't sell a house within 3 days, I don't sleep. But when you're buying lots and lots of houses, you've got to sell them, otherwise they pile up in your backyard. And I figured out that when I went to the real estate agent school, and I said, what do they teach people at real estate agent school? And they said, there's one section that they don't teach people at the real estate agent school. The one section that is not taught in Australia at real estate agent school. Does anybody know what that one section is? That they do not teach. Thank you. How to sell a house. They don't teach it in Australia. Yet everybody lists their house with a real estate agent who learns from another guy who was also never taught how to sell a house, who was also taught for another guy never told how to sell a house. Actually goes all the way back to when Moses was a small boy. But here's the deal. Does anybody here right now have a property somewhere in Australia that's on the market for sale right now? Anybody at all? Great. Tell you what, would you like to sell it real quickly and sell it within the next 2 days? Here's an idea for you right now. One of the reasons why houses aren't selling in Australia today is that people don't have the deposits required to buy houses. Does that make sense? So let's make it easy for them. Why don't we make sure you get that house sold in the next 2 or 3 days without dropping the price? By the way, if you guys could sell your property for the full retail price in the next 2 or 3 days, would that help you guys at all? Here's how you do that. You recognise the fact that it's not the prices are overpriced, it's that the amount of deposit that we're asking people to pay is overpriced because they don't have it. Less than 1% of Australians has $50,000 in their check account today. Does that make sense? So if you're trying to sell a house and you're trying to get the person to put in a $50,000 deposit, only 1% of Australians can buy it. So why don't we rechange that? Why don't we sell our houses based on, I want my price, but I want 90% of it today and I want 10% of it in 12 months. And by simply doing that, it just simply means there's one clause put in the contract that means at settlement in 6 weeks' time, the seller receives 90% of his proceeds now and the person upstamps their mortgage in 12 months and you get the other 10% in 12 months. It simply means also that your house sells tomorrow and it sells for its full retail price. Actual fact, you'll be so good at doing that, they'll wonder how you learned it and they'll make you a real estate agent. So let's move on, being passionate. Some years ago, and I was talking about lawyers. Someone said to me, one of my students went to the United Kingdom, and he said, Rick, you know you've got people in these different countries buying houses for $1. I said, yes. He said, I'm over here in the United Kingdom. I said, okay. He said, nah. The lawyers are telling me we can't buy houses for £1 in the United Kingdom. I said, really? It's interesting. I said, do they still have houses in the United Kingdom? I said, yes. Do they still have people? Yes, they are. But the lawyers said since 1677, the lawyers sent us to Australia, so us Australians wouldn't know what we're doing anyway, and we have to do it their way. Interesting. I went to the United Kingdom some years ago, and I've just been back here now the last couple of weeks. I haven't been in Australia a lot this year. Because I went over to the United Kingdom and I said to these lawyer guys, I said, you know what? Why can't we buy houses for £1? All the stuff, well, we couldn't do it. A little firm called Howard Kennedy and a little guy called Paul came out. He said, your name's Rick Otten, isn't it? I said, yes, it is. He said, I'll be back in 5 minutes. He came out and he said, I just stuck your name into Google. I've just found out that every country you go into, you change the way they buy and sell houses. He said, we've either got to figure out a way to do it, or in 10 years' time, we're going to wish we really had. I've just come back from the United Kingdom. I'm proud to say that as an Australian guy, I was on the front page of the English property magazine last week that 52 million people got across the United Kingdom saying, that guy from Australia has come back. That company now has a whole bunch of solicitors. In actual fact, now everybody in England now buys houses for £1. I want to show something real quick.
I'm Mark. I live in just outside Glasgow in a town called Houston. I attended Rick Otten's course at the very beginning of October this year. By the end of October, we'd completed 32 deals and pulled almost £150,000 out of that deal.
Met that man in October. I went there a week ago. I was in the United Kingdom teaching a class. I said, Mark, how have you done? He said, in that Scottish accent, Rick, I put £1.1 million worth of cash in my bank account since I met you in October. I said, how much you spent for your houses? He said, I got pretty good. I was buying them for £1, but last week I'm getting real good at this, Rick. I bought 2 houses for £1. All of a sudden, all the lawyers that 7 years ago said you couldn't do it have suddenly now realised where the money is. And now all the lawyers are teaching how we can buy houses for £1 in the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, the third thing I got out of that book, by the way, is besides being entrepreneurial, because I'm moving you guys to buy houses for £1 today, or for $1. And besides being passionate, you must get specialised in something. Do I have anybody in this room besides me that has a hobby of any sort? Anybody else? What's your hobby? Motocross. Motocross? Let me ask you something. If you had more time, would you do more motocross? Yep. And if you did more motocross, would you get better at it? Yep. Let me ask you something. Do people pay, ladies and gentlemen, do people pay for the best? What do you think? Yeah, because guess what? Here's something I know. If you're the best guy in motocross, I ain't going to spend the time learning it. What I will do, I'll write you a cheque to get your head into my head so I can start cashing in on your knowledge real fast. Does that make sense? I'm really big into being specialised, and I'm really big into finding out who's got the skill set I need, because I haven't got time to go to university. If you had the choice to go back to university, would you guys rather go back and do 4 years of university or just buy in the results? I'll buy in the results. I'll find out what you got, and if it's what I want to know, I'll buy in the results real fast. Specialised knowledge is really powerful. If you get good at something and you do something you love, you get good at it, you get the best, and people pay you a bucket load of money. No one ever falls over on the ground, has a heart attack and says, send me to the cheap doctor. It doesn't happen. This man I'm about to introduce you to came to me from Vietnam. And he said, Mr. Otten, I don't know much in Australia. I said, what do you know? He said, I've got to know how to make some money. I said, what do you know about houses? He said, nothing. I said, how much money you got? He said, I got none. I said, can you get hold of $1? He said, I could do better than that, Mr. Otten. I could get hold of 2.
Hi there, my name is DC. I'm from Sydney. I went to RIC boot camp for 3 days. I spent $2 and I bought 2 houses, and I made $17,000 cash and got $72,000 back end profits, totally of $96,000, and have a skill going as well. Thank you very much for that.
Hey, what do you reckon was probably the most powerful thing that guy just said? He's got a skill. That gentleman now goes to the Vietnamese community. See, if you come from Vietnam, you can't buy a house in Australia. You're locked out for 2 years based on the tradition.